Well, good morning, everyone. Buenos días a todos y todas. It's very good to be with you today, and it's especially good to be with our colleagues, Secretary Barcena, Secretary Buenrostro, and my good friends as well and colleagues, Secretary Raimondo, and of course, Trade Representative Tai. I'm also looking forward, I must say, to Alicia, to seeing you next week in Mexico to pursue our security dialogue. Before I get into what we've been doing today, let me just take a moment to express deep condolences on the passing of Senator Dianne Feinstein. I had the privilege of serving in the Senate when Senator Feinstein was there. Had an opportunity to travel with her, including to the Middle East. She was a trailblazer in American politics, an influential voice for strengthening U.S. national security and making it more inclusive, including through her leadership on the intelligence community. And she was a strong advocate, as everyone here knows, for closer ties with Mexico, just over the border from the state that she loved and served so admirably for decades. We're meeting at a moment of unprecedented momentum for the relationship between the United States and Mexico. If you look at last year, our bilateral trade hit a record $860 billion. Earlier this year, Mexico became the United States' largest trading partner. Our two countries have a shared vision for our economic future, one that's defined by fair competition, openness, transparency, measuring prosperity not only by how much countries grow, but by how many people share in that growth. As we discussed this morning, by creating the right incentives and business environments and harnessing our two nations' respective strengths, we have a tremendous opportunity to make North America the most competitive, the most productive, the most dynamic region in the world. That's what this dialogue is fundamentally about. We're continuing to strengthen, to expand and diversify supply chains in emerging industries like electric vehicles and semiconductors. Today, in fact, we're launching a joint semiconductor action plan to accelerate our integration, to scale our efforts, to attract new investment. Under President Biden's leadership, we're building regional clean energy technologies and semiconductor supply chains through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act that will drive our economies through this century. Mexico's overhauled one-stop shop website is providing prospective investors the tax and regulatory information that they need to take advantage of this landmark legislation. And we're taking steps to improve and strengthen even more our border coordination, like piloting a model port to streamline inspections and finding ways to reduce wait times, making it easier for people and goods to cross legally while strengthening our capacity to deal with fentanyl and other illegal narcotics. We're also addressing the root causes of irregular migration by boosting economic opportunity. In southern Mexico, in northern Central America, our development agencies, USAID and AMICID, are supporting 50,000 students, farmers, and others with jobs, with training, with access to markets and capital. When people can make a living, when they have confidence in their economic security, when they can put food on the table for their kids, when they can build a future at home, that's exactly what they'll choose to do. And they're less likely to undertake the very dangerous and hazardous journey north. We're collaborating to ensure that workers on both sides of the border are prepared to succeed in the industries of the future. That includes partnerships like the one between Arizona State University and the National Technological Institute of Mexico, offering Mexican students an 8-week English for the semiconductor industry course. This work on workforce development, on skills, is essential to our economic partnership and, again, to strengthening our joint competitiveness. When then Vice President Biden launched this dialogue a decade ago, he said that the relationship between our countries and people, and I quote, was grounded in a common border, a common culture, common values, common dreams, common potential. That's why we launched this dialogue in 2021, or really relaunched it. And by further deepening our economic integration, I'm confident that we'll continue to realize the extraordinary common potential that President Biden and then Vice President Biden pointed to. With that, Alicia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Sí. Bueno, muy buenas tardes.
Very good afternoon to you.
Tardes a todas, a todos, estimados
Everyone,
miembros de la prensa.
dear
Gracias
members
por
of the press
acompañarnos
corps,
en
thank
esta
you for being
tercera
with us
edición
for
del
this
Diálogo Económico de Alto Nivel México-Estados Unidos, que es uno de los mecanismos que hemos establecido entre ambos países para volver más eficiente nuestro diálogo y sobre todo para tener canales de comunicación en diferentes frentes. Tenemos otros, por supuesto, sin duda el Tratado de Libre Comercio, el TEMEC, y por supuesto el diálogo que tendremos la próxima semana sobre seguridad, migración, drogas sintéticas, armas, que lo llevaremos a cabo la próxima semana en México. Pero creo que hoy hemos logrado entender cuáles son los avances que hemos logrado para fortalecer nuestros lazos económicos y sociales, yo diría, y comerciales entre los dos países. Y de verdad quiero extenderle un agradecimiento muy especial al secretario Antony Blinken, a Gina Raimondo, a la embajadora Tai, que ha sido un honor para mí porque es mi primera reunión como secretaria de Relaciones Exteriores y muy bien acompañada de la secretaria Raquel Buenrostro, que es la que lleva, digamos, toda la coordinación de este diálogo económico de alto nivel. Pero solo voy a mencionar algunos temas. Por supuesto que nos hemos convertido en el primer socio comercial de Estados Unidos y eso implica muchas cosas. Implica responsabilidades, compromisos y también yo diría una visión conjunta de crear una de las zonas más potentes desde la perspectiva económica y social. Y por lo tanto, en esta sesión, pues hemos hablado de cómo reconstruir juntos, cómo promover el desarrollo económico y social, sobre todo en nuestro caso, en el sur de México, en Centroamérica, en Sudamérica, porque sabemos que estamos recibiendo una gran cantidad de personas hacia nuestras fronteras, pero también cómo aseguramos herramientas para la prosperidad futura y cómo invertimos en nuestra gente. Creo que uno de los temas más interesantes que se trató hoy es precisamente las cadenas de suministro de nuestra región y sobre todo semiconductores y conductores, con una estrategia muy clara, y es que esta región se convierte en la región más potente para producir conductores y semiconductores del mundo, y por lo tanto que se reorienten las inversiones hacia esta región, como seguramente lo abordará nuestra secretaria. Pero uno de los temas que hemos abordado aquí también es el tema de ¿cómo podemos fortalecer la infraestructura fronteriza? Y ese sí es un tema enorme. ¿Por qué? Porque nosotros en el comercio terrestre, imagínense ustedes, en el comercio entre Estados Unidos y México, tenemos vías de comunicación realmente que son muy importantes para el tránsito de mercancías, pero de personas y de muchos otros temas que voy a abordar a continuación. Contamos con 60 puertos de entrada en nuestra frontera común, 23 cruces terrestres y 37 pluviales. Presentamos avances en esta reunión de las obras de infraestructura de ambos lados para ver cómo podemos, en cierta medida, equiparar nuestras infraestructuras para lograr un mejor resultado. México está listo para concluir la obra de Otay 2, por ejemplo, en 2024, lo mismo Mexicali 1 y Calexico, San Luis Río Colorado, Agua Prieta y San Jerónimo, que son lugares muy importantes porque en realidad es por donde están pasando la mayor parte de los bienes y las mercancías entre nuestros dos países y personas, por supuesto. La Agencia Nacional de Aduanas, por ejemplo, está en cierta medida apoyando 1.7 millones de operaciones mensuales entre exportaciones e importaciones y son más de 20 millones de operaciones anuales. Se le está dando apoyo a 84,000 importadores y 817 agentes aduanales. Y se trata, fíjense de lo que se trata, la modernización es lograr que el 100% de nuestra carga que cruza la frontera sea automatizada. Y ahí estamos colaborando estrechamente para lograr estos cruces más fáciles. Porque fíjense que si nosotros disminuimos, de acuerdo al Atlantic Council, si reducimos 10 minutos el tiempo de cruce, se generan 3,000 empleos adicionales en 6 estados fronterizos de México: Baja California, Sonora, Chihuahua, Coahuila, Nuevo León y Tamaulipas. Y facilita el ingreso de 25 millones de dólares en mercancías hacia Estados Unidos. Entonces, creo que este programa de modernización de la frontera es importantísimo y ahí estamos invirtiendo en México. Este año nos han aprobado ya un presupuesto de 15,000 millones de pesos, 880 millones de dólares, que va a permitir, entre otras cosas, aumentar nuestra capacidad de detección de armas y drogas sintéticas. Sabemos que este es un tema muy, yo diría, muy profundo y que en realidad está resonando muy fuerte en la comunidad de Estados Unidos. Y yo quiero asegurarle, secretario Blinken, y por su conducto al presidente Biden, que tenemos instrucciones del presidente Andrés Manuel López Obrador de hacer todo lo que esté en nuestras manos para poder controlar el tráfico de drogas sintéticas y la cadena de suministro desde su origen, ¿verdad? Los precursores, la entrada a México, el paso fronterizo. En fin, queremos realmente decirles y confirmarles nuestra disposición y compromiso para que este tránsito, digamos, para controlarlo, drogas sintéticas, que duda cabe, armas, que es lo que para nosotros también es muy importante, y esa infraestructura creo que nos va a generar grandes beneficios, porque en el fondo lo que queremos es crear una frontera segura, una frontera que nos dé las garantías a la gente de que estamos haciendo bien las cosas. Y como usted dijo, y con eso voy a cerrar mi intervención, porque la parte más fuerte y económica la tiene la secretaria Buenrostro, es el tema que la migración es un tema que tiene profundas raíces económicas y sociales. Y por eso nosotros hemos acordado irnos a las causas estructurales de la migración. Pero también hemos visto que el problema de nuestras fronteras de México y Estados Unidos no nace ahí. Es decir, en verdad, las personas están llegando más bien desde el sur. Entonces tenemos que tener una mirada hemisférica, regional, para incluir desde Ecuador, Colombia, Panamá, Venezuela, Haití, Honduras, Guatemala, Costa Rica, y por eso nuestro presidente está tomando un gran liderazgo en esta materia. Y la próxima, y aquí, secretario Blinken, lo hemos conversado, realmente creo que ayer, además de esta reunión con ustedes, tuvimos la ocasión de reunirnos con el secretario Mayorkas, con la asesora presidencial Liz Sherwood, precisamente, y con algunos de los representantes de estos países, para hablar precisamente de acciones conjuntas para controlar este flujo migratorio, para ofrecer opciones de desarrollo y para evaluar vías regulares y seguras de movilidad. Esto es urgente, porque la verdad es que sí hemos tenido una crisis que también nos afectó en los cruces fronterizos del comercio, y por lo tanto tenemos que estar muy preparados para ello. Y creo que acá en Washington para mí ha sido un agrado estar, porque he tenido la oportunidad de reunirme también con representantes del Senado y de la Cámara de Representantes, House of Representatives, para hablar de la relación bilateral y para de verdad tener una visión conjunta del legislativo, del ejecutivo, en donde podamos hablar de temas de seguridad, de migración, de desarrollo, de comercio, de tráfico de armas, de drogas sintéticas, de fentanilo, y desde luego decirles que ambos gobiernos estamos trabajando fuertemente para ir a las causas de origen. Tanto USAID como AMEXID están uniendo esfuerzos para invertir. Nosotros estamos invirtiendo en Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, $150 millones, generando beneficio para 54,000 familias. Eso ya es un avance. Estas 54,000 familias lo van a pensar 2 o 3 veces antes de moverse de su lugar de origen. Muchas gracias, secretario Blinken. Estoy segura que estas reuniones que tenemos entre Estados Unidos y México se convierten en reuniones de amigos, de socios, y así podemos crear una comunidad norteamericana. Muchas gracias.
Create and build an American community. Thank you very much.
Secretary Buenrostro.
¿Se escucha? Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Pues sin duda decir que este diálogo de alto nivel fue un diálogo muy productivo, muy cordial y con muchas expectativas hacia el futuro. En este momento hablábamos de que es el mejor momento de la relación económica entre México y Estados Unidos. Los niveles comerciales de intercambio son los más altos en la historia. Somos ya el primer socio comercial de Estados Unidos. La inversión ha crecido. Tenemos en México cifras históricas de inversión extranjera directa, donde la mayor parte de la inversión extranjera es de nuestros socios de Estados Unidos, y también donde se está dando una mayor integración de las cadenas de suministro. Esto sin duda es un fortalecimiento y una integración de los gobiernos, pero también ha sido con mucho esfuerzo del sector privado. El día de ayer hubo reuniones también con el sector sector privado tanto de Estados Unidos como de México. Es la primera vez que se coinciden en fechas un diálogo de alto nivel económico entre gobiernos como un diálogo entre el sector privado. Esto nos lleva a una integración, a una hermandad que nos va a llevar seguramente a muy buenos resultados. Estamos trabajando juntos en convertir en América del Norte en un lugar de integración económica más importante para la relocalización e integración de las cadenas de suministro de varios sectores estratégicos y además para no tener tanta dependencia y garantizar la no irrupción de las cadenas de suministro. Entre ellos se encuentran la electromovilidad, la parte de energías limpias, dispositivos médicos y por supuesto uno de los más importantes que ocupó la reunión del día de hoy fue el tema de semiconductores. Particularmente en el tema de semiconductores, México y Estados Unidos estamos trabajando cómo complementarnos en esa tecnología para poder tener la cadena más fuerte en materia de semiconductores y optimizar todos los mercados de tecnologías de la información y comunicaciones. Para México es una gran oportunidad también porque para nosotros nos permite contar con mayores empleos y mejor remunerados, trabajo especializado que va de la mano con el gran talento mexicano que existe. México tiene una cantidad de egresados ingenieros superior a la de Alemania, por ejemplo. Tenemos el doble de ingenieros egresados por año a Brasil, pero además nuestros ingenieros son de los mejores capacitados. Y esto se está fortaleciendo aún más con el trabajo conjunto con las universidades de Estados Unidos, pero también al interior del país, para darles y la industria para formalizar un currículum más apropiado para los nuevos sectores industriales que se están desarrollando. Sin duda, el día de hoy estamos celebrando una visión conjunta entre el presidente Andrés Manuel López Obrador y el presidente Biden, donde lo más importante siempre es la gente. Y todo este desarrollo económico y bienestar va a ser siempre manteniendo a nuestro pueblo en el centro del bienestar. Es un desarrollo económico por el bienestar de nuestros pueblos.
Secretary Raimondo.
Thank you. Thank you and good afternoon. Special thank you to Secretary Blinken for hosting us for an excellent and important session. It's an honor to be here, and a big warm welcome to Secretaries Buenrostro and Barcena for joining us here in the United States. I also want to add my note of sadness and gratitude to Senator Feinstein. Not only was she a strong advocate for immigrants, but was a pioneer and somebody that many of us women in politics and public service looked up to for many years. She paved the way for the rest of us, and it is, in fact, a very, very great loss for our country. As has been said, the U.S. and Mexico have an incredibly important, significant, and growing trade relationships, one of the largest in the world. And the relationship, though, isn't just limited to trade, as important and as large as that is. The relationship includes strong historical, familial, and cultural ties. And I think we have to remember that as we celebrate 200 years of bilateral relationships, our bilateral relationship, yes, let's lean into trade, and yes, let's expand that trade, but let's continue to work together as neighbors and as longstanding partners. 2 years ago, our governments reconvened the high-level economic dialogue, and it has been a very positive and productive engagement in that time. Our goal in this dialogue is to make it easier for our countries to trade, to invest, and to innovate. And by building regional prosperity, as has been said, we will help to develop diverse, high-skilled workforces and spur the next wave of economic growth, and do it in a way that is inclusive so that all of the peoples of both of our countries have an opportunity to participate in the economic prosperity which we together will create. As you have heard, today was an opportunity to both review the progress that we have made over the past couple of years, but even more important, to talk about where we go from here, the progress we will make together as we go forward. And one of the areas on which I am very focused is the area of semiconductor. We at the Commerce Department are hard at work implementing the CHIPS and Science Act, which of course will supercharge the U.S. semiconductor industry, creating hundreds of thousands of high-paying semiconductor jobs here in the United States. But there is a huge opportunity for Mexico to also participate in the economic benefits of the supply chain. And so we are looking to use the HLED to figure out ways of better coordinating so that we realize the significant economic opportunities for Mexican workers and Mexican businesses, including small and medium-sized Mexican businesses. It just creates an opportunity for Mexico to be part of our efforts and incorporated into the efforts of building more resilient supply chains through partnering with our allies and with our neighbor. So in the weeks and months ahead, we will continue our engagement with the private sector, with labor, civil society, academic institutions, all of whom are essential to our success. And I think I can speak for all of us that we have high hopes for the high-level economic dialogue and the role that it will play in achieving this vision. And together we will build a secure and prosperous North America that stands ready to tackle the challenges of the 21st century. So thank you, and thank you for hosting us.
Thank you, Gina. Katherine?
Thank you. Tanya, is this on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't paying attention. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us. As my colleagues noted, our relationship with Mexico is special and important. We share more than just a border. The sheer volume of our bilateral trade in goods and services really does speak for itself. More than $2 billion per day. Mexico is now our top trading partner, and we have an important trade agreement, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, that has further deepened our ties. I also wanted to take a moment, along with my colleagues, to pay homage to the great Senator Dianne Feinstein, who was an enormous supporter and champion of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. And I also want to note that this has been a hard week for all of us as another great champion of our efforts in renewing our trade ties and bringing a new approach to trade. Tom Conway, the president of the United Steelworkers Union, passed away earlier this week. So it's been a hard week, but a good week to remind ourselves of our champions and to carry on their legacies. Our people have a shared history and culture going back centuries. Last year, we celebrated 200 years of bilateral relations, and it is this human connection that distinguishes and reinforces our relationship. And this is why President Biden relaunched this dialogue in 2021, to work together so that our people enjoy greater prosperity and a greater quality of life. Trade plays such an important role in our pursuit of this vision. Investing in our people and our workers is a top priority for our administration and a key pillar of our worker-centered trade policy. This new approach is especially important as both of our countries continue to navigate an ever-changing global economy marked by a worsening climate crisis, geopolitical tensions that are rising, food insecurity, and growing inequality. And together with Mexico, we are working to mitigate the risk of future supply chain disruptions. For example, we're standing up a mechanism under the USMCA to ensure cooperation during trade flow disruptions that happen during crises and emergencies. And we are leveraging our trade relationship to lift up all workers and to drive a race to the top in North America, in line with our vision under Pillar 4 of this dialogue, investing in our people. Separately, through the USMCA, USTR is working closely with the government of Mexico to ensure that the rights of workers to freedom of association and collective bargaining are being upheld. Just over the past year, we've secured wins for workers at several different facilities in Mexico: new collective bargaining agreements, major salary increases, safer working conditions. This is having a real impact on working people's lives on both sides of the border. Our agreement is working in so many other ways too. We're collaborating on workforce development to equip our people, especially our women, our youth, and underserved communities, to boost their success in a new era. We're working together on important environmental issues, and we're empowering small businesses and entrepreneurs to fully benefit from the USMCA. Just last week, we joined our partners in Mexico City for the second USMCA Small Business Dialogue. At the same time, there is a lot more we know that we must and can do together. I want to close on the importance of stakeholder engagement. The success of our work under the dialogue will depend on who gets a seat at the table, because policies and initiatives should not be carried out in a vacuum or reflect the views of only a select group. So I'm going to conclude my remarks where I started them, with a focus on our people. We must hear directly from them, especially those from historically underserved and underrepresented communities in Mexico and in the United States. Not only must they have a seat at the table, their voices must help shape our work going forward. And I'll quote President Biden from the United Nations earlier this month when he said that we must live up to the promises we have made to ourselves, to each other, and to the most vulnerable, and to all those who will inherit the world we create. I look forward to our continued work with all of my colleagues here and with our stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The first question today goes to James Longman with ABC News.
Thank you very much. The State Department has already said, Secretary Blinken, that the shutdown threatens the United States' reputation around the world. My question is, would you accept a deal which did not include aid for Ukraine? And a second question, the United States provides hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to Uganda, and this is a country that has just passed one of the harshest anti-gay laws in the world. President Biden has already condemned it. You've put sanctions on various individuals on their ability to travel, but I'm wondering what material response the administration is planning and when we can expect that.
Great. Thanks very much. Let me take the second part first. We have, as you know, consistently expressed very deep concerns about the Anti-Homosexuality Act that was signed into law earlier this year. It infringes very clearly on the human rights of Ugandan citizens, of journalists, of its citizens. It jeopardizes progress in the fight against HIV/AIDS. Uganda has been, for so many years, an excellent partner in that very fight. Jeopardizing it makes no sense. We're concerned, of course, that the community itself could be further marginalized and decades of gains could be lost. And that would be, in and of itself, a human tragedy. When the law passed, going back to May, President Biden directed the government to evaluate all aspects of our engagement with Uganda, including our foreign assistance, including our investments, including the application of sanctions. That process is ongoing, and when I have any news for you on that front, we will, of course, will share it. When it comes to possible government shutdown, I would just say this. First, we hope it doesn't happen. From the perspective of the State Department, we're very focused on making sure that no matter what happens, we can focus our resources on advancing and protecting the national security, and of course, making sure that we can carry out the functions necessary to do that, to protect human life, property, and security. Our work would clearly be affected by this. It would make it harder to do everything that we do to try to advance national security. So we urge Congress not to take this step. I'm not going to comment on the specifics of possible legislative arrangements. That is up to members of Congress. But I can just say as a general proposition that the shutdown shouldn't happen. But if it does, we will take every possible step to make sure that at the very least, we're carrying out our functions to protect national security.
For the next question, Ariel Moutsatsos with Televisa.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning. I have a question for Secretary Blinken and also for the Minister Alicia Barcena. Secretary Blinken, Attorney General Garland said recently that there are diplomatic talks with Mexico regarding the extradition of the other three Chapitos, the brothers of Ovidio Guzman. How are those talks going? Has their extradition been formally requested? And what are your expectations regarding a timeline for that, since they are not yet under arrest? And then my question for Foreign Minister Alicia Barcena in Spanish, if you don't mind. El Departamento de Estado,
The State
Secretaria,
Department,
hizo público
Madam
hace unos
Secretary,
días
made it
que
public a
Estados
few
Unidos
days
va
ago
a
that the
expandir
U.S. is going
radicalmente
to
sus
radically
operaciones en
expand its
México contra el
operations
fentanilo
in Mexico
y a
against
reestructurar
fentanyl
a su
and
personal,
restructure
incluyendo
its
nuevos
staff,
agentes.
including new
¿Es esto
agents.
algo que México y Estados Unidos
Is this
hablaron
something
y
that the
acordaron
U.S. and Mexico
ya?
talked
Y en
about
su
and agreed
caso, si
upon
ya se
already?
aprobó la
And if
adición de nuevos
so,
agentes y
then
cuántos son?
has
Muchas
adding
gracias. Thank
new
you.
agents been approved, and how many? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question. I'm afraid, though, I'm going to disappoint you because I have to refer you to the Department of Justice when it comes to extradition matters.
Sí, bueno, gracias por su pregunta.
Yes, thank you for your question.
En general, los agentes
Generally
extranjeros
speaking,
de
foreign
seguridad son
security
autorizados
agents
por el grupo
are
de alto
authorized
nivel
by
de
the
seguridad
high-level
que
security
se
group
estableció en la
that
Ley de
was
Seguridad Nacional.
created in the National
Son
Security
decisiones
Law. These are
colegiadas
joint
que se toman
decisions
sobre
that
la
are
base del
made
respeto a nuestra
based
soberanía
on
y
respect
reciprocidad.
for sovereignty and reciprocity.
Estos temas precisamente
These issues
se debaten
specifically
en el
are
Gabinete de
discussed
Seguridad,
in
que es
our
coordinado
security
por
cabinet,
Rosa
coordinated by
Rodríguez,
Rosa
quien
Isela
es la persona
Rodriguez,
indicada
who
para
would
dar una
be
respuesta
the right
específica
person to give you
sobre
a
este tema.
specific answer to your question.
For the next question, Eduard Ribas with FA.
Thank you very much. Secretary Blinken, I would like to ask if in yesterday's meetings with the foreign minister from India, you raised concerns about this crisis with Canada, and if you urge India to collaborate with Canada in the investigation of this assassination. Secondly, for Ambassador Tai and Secretaria Buenrostro, did you address the trade dispute over the Mexican corn? When do you expect the issue to be resolved, and when? Y finalmente, si me permite la canciller, vimos ayer que algunos
Minister of Foreign Affairs will allow me. We saw yesterday that a few Republicans would like to condition funds to Mexico on the fight against fentanyl. Is this a concern for you? Are you worried that in some way cooperation between both countries might become complicated during the campaign? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As I've said before, and other colleagues have said before, we're very concerned about the allegations that have been raised by Canada, by Prime Minister Trudeau. We have been in close contact with Canada about that, and at the same time, we have engaged with the Indian government and urged them to work with Canada on an investigation. And I had the opportunity to do so again in my meeting yesterday with Foreign Minister Shankar. Those responsible need to be held accountable, and we hope that our friends in both Canada and India will work together to resolve this matter. Katherine?
Yes, on the corn issue, Secretary Buenrostro and I had a bilateral yesterday where we covered many issues. We did not cover corn, however, and that's not because it's not important, but it's because we're at the point in our conversations where we've handed the issue over to our lawyers. So in terms of timing, you can take a look at the USMCA procedures. I think it will be a number of months before we expect a response, but there are a clear set of procedures that are set out, and our teams are participating on both sides.
Como lo comenta la secretaria Tai, para resolver una controversia ya hay mecanismos preestablecidos, es un procedimiento, hay plazos determinados, inicia con la instalación de un panel que es el que va a resolver y concluye con la resolución final. En este momento estamos en la conformación del panel y para mediados de marzo más o menos, considerando los tiempos legales, podemos estar teniendo una resolución final. Ahorita es nada más trabajo de los panelistas y de los abogados hasta obtener el resultado final.
Hemos seguido con mucho cuidado el debate que se está dando en torno a este tema. Sabemos que hay digamos, esto que han dicho algunos republicanos. No creemos que pase finalmente, pero lo que sí nos interesa es que la comunidad de Estados Unidos sepa que México tiene un gran compromiso por apoyar en el combate al tráfico de drogas y fundamentalmente fentanilo. Yo creo que eso es lo que más me interesa transmitir, que estamos muy interesados en colaborar, en cooperar, en hacer todo lo que esté a nuestro alcance para controlar todo lo que es la cadena de valor la cadena productiva, digamos, ilegal de los precursores y del fentanilo mismo.
And the final question goes to Jesus Esquivel with Proceso.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Secretario Blinken,
Secretary Blinken,
le voy a hacer la pregunta en
I
español.
will pose my question in Spanish.
México, estados específicos están padeciendo gran violencia,
Certain
donde
Mexican
el gobierno
states are
mexicano
suffering
la minimiza,
great
y me refiero al caso de
violence
Chiapas,
minimized
a de
by the
Guerrero
Mexican government.
y Zacatecas,
And I am
respectivamente.
talking about Chiapas,
Hubo asesinatos
Zacatecas,
incluso de
Guerrero.
jóvenes,
Youth
y
have been
el presidente de
murdered,
México ha dicho
and
que
the
simplemente
Mexican
fue un día
president
difícil.
has said
La pregunta que le quiero hacer a usted
it was
es
a
cómo va a ser
difficult
la
day.
reunión del diálogo de alto
I
nivel.
am wondering what
Si
you can
Estados
tell us
Unidos, como
about the high-level
corresponsable de esta
dialogue
violencia
meeting.
por el alto consumo de
If
fentanilo en
the
Estados Unidos y el
US
tráfico de armas,
with its co-shared
que aunque aumentó la
responsibility, given the
confiscación,
high levels
no
of
es
fentanyl
suficiente,
consumption here and what has to do
¿está
with
dispuesto a
the
ofrecer
guns
más
that come
ayuda?
into our
O
country?
si en
Are you
México
willing
van a
to
presentar
provide
ustedes alguna
greater
iniciativa
support?
en
Are you
este
going to
sentido,
introduce
tomando en
initiatives
cuenta el
to
gran
that
nivel de
effect,
violencia que se vive
taking
en
into
el país
account the
y que
high
ustedes
levels of
reconocen a través de las
violence
alertas de la
in
Embajada
the country, and which you
de Estados
recognize
Unidos en
through
México?
the alerts of the
Y la
U.S.
pregunta
Embassy in
para la
Mexico?
secretaria
And my question
Barcena
for
tiene
Secretary
que ver con
Barcena
migración.
has to do with
Organizaciones
migration.
de noticias de Estados Unidos reportaron
News
un nuevo
agencies
acuerdo,
in the U.S. have
el
reported
cual no ha sido
a new
aclarado por
agreement,
ninguno de los dos
which has
gobiernos,
not
en el
been
cual señalan
clarified
que entre
by
los
either
puntos acordados
government.
está el que
It is
México va a
said
hacer
that one of the agreed upon
deportaciones
points is
inmediatas
that Mexico
de
will
migrantes a
undertake
terceros países.
immediate
Quisiera que si por favor
deportations
nos
of
aclara
migrants to
este
third
punto
countries.
y
Could you
ojalá no
give
le dé la
us
vuelta y
some
nos diga
clarity
sí o
on this?
no habrá
Could you
deportaciones
say yes
inmediatas.
or no?
Y por último, usted
about
acaba
whether
de
you will
destacar el
undertake
programa de USAID
immediate
como parte de la
deportations. And then you were
cooperación
talking
México-Estados
about
Unidos. El presidente López Obrador siempre lo ha calificado como una herramienta de intervención de Estados Unidos. ¿Difiere usted con el presidente en ese sentido o por qué lo está aplaudiendo?
Do you see this differently? Why are you celebrating this?
Thank you very much for the question. This is a shared challenge and a shared responsibility for the United States and Mexico. Fentanyl coming into the United States is the #1 killer of Americans aged 18 to 49. So it is for us a national priority. But it's a priority across the entire spectrum of action that we need to take. And that starts with working to reduce demand, working to increase treatment, making sure that people can get help when they need it. And we're making very massive efforts to do that in this country, including with public information campaigns, and including with actions that are taking place at a community level, at a state level, and at a national level. But we also have to be acting across, as I said, the entire spectrum. That includes at our border, that includes with our close partner Mexico, and it includes with countries around the world, because this is a global challenge. Many of the chemical precursors that go into fentanyl are manufactured halfway around the world, then come close to us in Mexico, fabricated into fentanyl, sent across the border. So we also have to deal with that part of the chain. I say all of this because we put together a coalition of countries this summer, more than 100 countries now, with Mexico and the United States playing a very important lead role, to make sure that we're acting cooperatively and collectively against the challenge of synthetic opioids. This is a challenge that is not simply one for the United States or Mexico. We're seeing this spring up around the world. We're seeing Captagon, we're seeing methamphetamines, we're seeing other synthetic opioids that are wreaking havoc in various parts of the world. And fentanyl itself, while we've been the canary in the coal mine in the United States, we're now seeing fentanyl use and distribution go up in various parts of the world as these criminal cartels are trying to make markets elsewhere, because our market, tragically, has become so saturated. But in terms of what the United States and Mexico are doing together, and Alicia talked about the importance that we both attach to this, I think it's very important to note that not only do we have a responsibility on the demand side, we also have a responsibility when it comes to guns that are getting into Mexico and that are helping to fuel the violence that goes along with the cartels that are engaged in the drug enterprise, and violence more broadly. We feel a deep sense of responsibility. Last year, we made it, for the first time, a federal crime to be engaged in the trafficking of guns. That's a very important new tool and new element. We're working in ever closer collaboration to get at the guns before they get into Mexico, and working collaboratively with Mexico law enforcement. At the same time, we're seeing very important collaboration in Mexico with Mexican authorities on dealing with fentanyl, the fabrication, the labs, et cetera, in Mexico. We have dismantled synthetic drug labs. We pursued criminal networks and their finances. We reduced the amount of illicit firearms, cash, and other illicit goods that are crossing our border. And we strongly support Mexico in its efforts to counter production and trafficking. We're providing assistance on seizing and investigating these clandestine drug labs. We're preventing the diversion of chemical precursors. We're increasing information sharing on synthetic drugs and precursors. We're enhancing security at our ports of entry. It's worth noting that of the synthetic opioids, of the fentanyl coming into the United States via Mexico, of the fentanyl that we seized, 95% is coming through legal ports of entry. So the efforts that we're making to strengthen even more our capacity to detect and stop this flow, that's a very important element. So it's a very long way of saying this is a matter of shared responsibility for us, shared obligation, shared concern. But it goes beyond the United States and Mexico. It's a global challenge, a global problem, and our two countries together are now working with, as I said, more than 100 other countries to get at it in new and effective ways.
Quisiera responderle diciéndole en primer lugar que México no minimiza el problema de la violencia en los estados que usted menciona. El presidente lo ha abordado directamente todos los días, de lunes a viernes. Se sostiene una reunión del Gabinete de Seguridad en donde se analiza con cuidado de 6 a 7 de la mañana todos los días cuáles son los problemas que está enfrentando el país, y sobre todo se han analizado y se analizan con cuidado los estados que usted menciona, Zacatecas, Guerrero, Chiapas, desde luego que estamos muy alertas, y el presidente López Obrador personalmente, junto con el secretario de la Defensa, la secretaria de Seguridad y Protección Ciudadana, el secretario de Marina, la secretaria de Gobernación y la Comisión Nacional de Inteligencia, abordando este tema todos los días. Sin duda, el tráfico de armas es uno de los problemas críticos, y efectivamente estamos trabajando con Estados Unidos, y le agradezco tanto que estemos hablando de esto como una responsabilidad compartida, porque en el fondo es así, estamos juntos, somos vecinos y lo vamos a hacer, pues, la verdad, por muchos años, espero, y esto va a llevarnos a que tenemos que ayudarnos, y las armas que están entrando desde Estados Unidos a México ilegalmente, pues son alrededor de 200,000 armas al año, y eso realmente, pues sí, lo que estamos haciendo, y esto sí que es muy importante, es que la Secretaría de Defensa, que ojalá y algún día puedan ustedes conversar directamente con ellos, está haciendo un trazado muy cuidadoso de estas armas y cómo se van yendo a los distintos estados de la República. Esto es una información que con gusto, si usted la necesita, se la podemos compartir. En relación a los retornos asistidos, si me permite cambiar el término, retornos asistidos, México está llevando adelante retornos asistidos hacia Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, estamos explorando Ecuador, Venezuela y Colombia. Y alrededor ya estamos realizando 6 vuelos semanales en el caso de Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, los países centroamericanos. Y creo que es muy importante que el tono de nuestra conversación sea un tono constructivo y con evidencias en la mano. Muchas gracias.
Thank you all.
Perdón, lo de USAID. A ver, USAID,
right, USAID.
en realidad
USAID
es una agencia de
really
cooperación de
is
Estados
a
Unidos, lo mismo
U.S.
que nuestra
cooperation
agencia
agency,
mexicana de
just
cooperación.
as
Lo que
we have a
estamos
Mexican
haciendo ahora
cooperation
es
agency.
unir
What we're doing
esfuerzos
right
para
now is
trabajar
bringing
en
together our
Centroamérica
efforts to
juntos.
work
Y
together
eso
in
está
Central
dando
America,
resultados.
and
Y
that
aquí lo que
is
importa es que seamos
working
capaces de dar
out.
resultados en las
As long-
poblaciones que más lo necesitan.
And what
Y
we
esto, como
want
lo dijo
is
la
to show
secretaria
results in
Buenrostro,
communities that
nuestro
need it.
foco
As
central
Secretary
de estos
Buenrostro said,
diálogos de
the
alto
main
nivel,
focus of the high-level
económicos, de
dialogues,
seguridad, de drogas, de
economic,
migración,
security,
de armas,
drugs,
es
migration,
para
weapons,
beneficio de las
the
personas.
goal is to benefit people.
Thank you all.
Thank you.